If we're thinking that, people going through music school and this type of thing, if we're training them, to become professional musicians, or that's the assumption, then beyond just, having technical prowess at your instrument, I think we also need to be teaching people that it doesn't matter how much technical prowess you have if you're not engaging your audience.
Hello and welcome to Art Restart, where we learn from artists who are shaking up the status quo in their respective fields. I'm Pierre Carlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, which is brought to you by the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. Okay, quick. Think of your favorite piano percussion duet. Okay, just name a piano percussion duet. Any piano percussion duet. Well, after this episode, you'll have an answer, because we are spending time with, to my knowledge, the world's only professional piano percussion duet that, given the amount of noise they make, has a very funny name. Their name is SHHH Ensemble. SHHH Ensemble comprises pianist Edana Higham and percussionist Zac Pulak, who also happen to be life partners. Since launching SHHH in 2016, Edana and Zac have made waves in Canada's classical music scene, playing in venues and festivals from coast to coast, and garnering raves from critics and audiences alike. Their passion is new music, and as such they have collaborated with renowned contemporary classical composers, including John Beckwith, Monica Pearce, and past Art Restart guest Frank Horvat. Let's listen to a piece of theirs from their debut album, Meanwhile. It's a piece called Spirit Gradient by composer Jocelyn Murdoch. Art Restart wanted to speak with this talented duet because, as you may know, new classical music can feel daunting to presenters and audiences alike, but Edana and Zac have managed to make it enormously engaging, fun and interesting for themselves and for their audiences, building a sizable fan base along the way. How have they done it? What's their particular secret sauce? Zac and Edana spoke to me from their home in Ottawa. I started off by asking them, surprise, surprise, how they decided to merge their individual talents to create their new ensemble.
Yeah, so we had been a couple for a few years, and we were both attending residencies at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity in Canada. And we had coordinated to do our independent residencies at the same time. And while we were there, we sort of shifted gears. People kept asking us, do you guys ever play together? And we're like, no, not really. We haven't tried that yet. And anyway, we started talking about it during that residency, and it seemed like something that we both wanted to pursue. So that's kind of how it all started in 2017, I believe. Or no, 2016.
What made you, or the other people kept asking you, what made you think that, this is a duet that could work?
Well, I think the big thing for us was that when people started asking us this, we realized that there wasn't actually that much repertoire. I think, like, when people think of piano and percussion, the thing that comes to mind is the Bartók Sonata, which is 2 pianos and 2 percussion. But beyond that piece, there's only maybe a handful of pieces that exist out there. So we thought it was a really, special opportunity to kind of build a repertoire from the ground up.
I see. So that was one of your main interests, basically kind of filling an existing hole in the repertoire.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I know that is piano considered a percussion instrument as well as keyboard?
Yes. Yeah, it definitely is.
Okay.
And especially the way I get to play it in a lot of our pieces, it's treated quite percussively. So. Yeah.
Can you describe, give me examples of that?
Well, like all the kind of like repeated notes that kind of would be like hitting like a marimba or something. Yeah, I get a lot of that kind of writing in a lot of our pieces.
Not that we sometimes ask for that, but it often just comes out naturally. Like the composer they know we're a piano percussion duo, and the piano gets treated more percussively just by virtue of the
Oh.
instrumentation. So it's actually surprising when we get a piece and it's like, oh, this looks like a more traditional piano
Like
part.
more like a lyrical part. Yeah, that's always surprising.
So when was the first time, describe the first time you actually performed together? What was that like? What were you playing and what did it feel like?
Well, so the very, I think, Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Was it at Banff?
yeah, I think we did some
No.
like, well, maybe we were just discussing actually in Banff and we didn't actually
Perform in that
together.
first residency, no.
But one of the first pieces we looked at together was a guitar and piano piece, the Fantasia for guitar and piano by Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco. And Adana's dad is a classical guitarist and had spent a lot of time, well, did an entire degree researching Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco. So it was a composer that Edana knew well and a piece that Edana had heard. And it was just something that worked really nicely on marimba. And it was a great way for us to kind of get started.
At what point did you think, I think we're onto something. I think this could be the thing, the career?
Well, I think we just both really enjoyed that first kind of exploring this piece together, something that, yeah, to our knowledge had never been done in that, like had been arranged in that way. And we thought this is, yeah, I mean, it was just really fun. We had a blast. And then we started thinking about other pieces that we could either commission or arrange, and things just snowballed from there.
Clearly, since there isn't a repertoire specifically for your ensemble, how did you go about commissioning composers? How did you let them know you were worthwhile and that they should? How did you line up funds to commission them? Who made the introductions? Could you describe how that happened?
Yeah, well, our first commissions, I guess you could say, were from friends and family friends, and they were at least for the first big piece we had, which was by the Canadian composer John Beckwith, who was a family friend. He wrote it just out of the kindness of his of his heart, and he was how old was he, Edana? He was 93, 94 years old when he wrote the piece for us, and it turned out to be one of the last major works that he wrote, and it's a gorgeous piece. It's called Meanwhile, and it's also the title track of our debut album. And that piece, yeah, has been with us since the very beginning of our duo. So it's pretty special.
And thereafter, how did you go about creating all those relationships outside of your existing friends and family circle?
Well, I think that the really nice thing about being a piano percussion duo is that most composers, except for the ones that have worked with us, haven't had the opportunity to necessarily write for that instrumentation.
So it's inherently interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really been a thing that's helped us kickstart a lot of things, especially before we had built up any sort of reputation. And then to answer your question about funding, in Canada, we're quite lucky. There's three kind of tiers of funding: municipal, provincial, and federal. And within those different tiers of public funding, there are grants specifically for commissioning new work from composers. So we've definitely made good use of that. But because of that, we've mainly worked with Canadian composers. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I guess you could say, in that way.
Edana, as you were mapping out your career before SHHH came into, I love saying that, before SHHH came into existence. But as you were mapping out your career, what had the ensemble not been created? What kind of career were you imagining for yourself? And then Zac, I'm going to ask you the question as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I guess I was really fortunate that when we did create SHHH, I was pretty fresh out of school. I was only about 6 months out of school. So I didn't have a chance to explore other things before, but I mean, I had always had a huge interest in contemporary music from a very young age. I think my teachers at the time always encouraged that. So I always knew that contemporary music and hopefully commissioning was going to be a part of my existence. I guess I probably imagined myself working more with like string players and stuff, but when I had a percussionist right there, that's the way it went. Anyway, he bows marimba sometimes. It's all good.
Zac, what kind of career were you mapping out for yourself?
Yeah, so we went to the University of Ottawa, and that school for percussion and especially and the other orchestra instruments is a really orchestra focused program, and I got a really wonderful foundation from my teachers. I sub occasionally with orchestras as an extra musician, so that part of my career is still, something that I do. But Ensemble has been just wonderful for being able to, fully immerse myself in contemporary music. And just like Edana, from a fairly young age, from when I first started playing, I really knew I wanted to be doing something with new music. Yeah, so I couldn't really imagine doing it another way.
What were your biggest challenges as the first couple of years that you were officially an ensemble? Like, how did you line up for your first bookings? What were some unexpected lessons learned?
I think one of the biggest things were convincing presenters that we could draw an audience, and that just because we were playing contemporary music, it wouldn't alienate an audience just because we weren't a string quartet or a piano trio, playing Beethoven and maybe with just one contemporary piece. So that was a big thing, convincing presenters that if we were doing an all contemporary program, that it would still be engaging and exciting for the audience, and that they would enjoy their evening.
So how did you plan that? Because I know for many people, new contemporary classical music can be a little daunting and a little off-putting. Like, people think of it as quote unquote difficult. So how did you plan it so that you knew your audience would be engaged?
For us, like the audience experience is really at the forefront of our, when we're planning a program. That's what we're thinking of it in terms of how we're trying to create an arc across the program and really make it a full experience that's that's connected from beginning to end.
Can you give me an example of how that works?
Well, like for instance, one of the projects that we worked on over the pandemic was a program that was a continuous program. So each piece dovetailed into the next one and just created this 45-minute or hour-long arc that was just continuous music, kind of going from one thing to another. And we challenged ourselves to try to be able to tell this story through just sound. Well, yeah, trying to keep it engaging and interesting the whole time. And
sound and movement as well. We worked with a choreographer to connect all the pieces to make it like visually seamless as well.
Right, because there is a lot of movement in your pieces. At what point did you realize, how did you develop your vision for audience engagement? Like, at what point did you start bringing in a choreographer? How did you know you were going to put on, not only play a concert, but put on a show?
I think that just came out of just naturally, was something that we're both drawn to. One of my pet peeves, at least as an audience member at concerts, is sort of the in between time between pieces, if there's shuffling on stage and this kind of thing. And so that, again, from the very beginning, was how can we turn this necessary movement into a part of the show. So I don't remember where we heard this quote from, but I love this word, is choreography. And I can't give credit to whoever told us that, because I don't remember. But we always think about the choreography of the transitions between pieces, and how can we either make it a part of the concert or make it an interesting experience for the audience if there's some kind of a reset that needs to be done.
Can you give me an example of choreography you're particularly proud of?
In our most recent concerts we've been doing, the Starry Night show, that we have this moment in the program where we need to have there's quite a number of percussion instruments that need to get moved between pieces. And we also have this piece that brings us away from our traditional kind of places. Like Edana will no longer be sitting at the piano. So we would invite the audience to join us on stage for this piece and experience this piece from up close. And during that time, it takes a couple of minutes for people to migrate to the stage. And so during that time, we would make our switches, and then everyone is in place up at the front of the stage and gets to hear this piece up close and very, very personal. So
how do your presenters feel about that? Because that probably involves more staff, and it's unusual. Yeah. How do they react?
So far, it's only been positive. We ran into a couple of times where they weren't convinced that it was necessary or that it wouldn't go over well with their audience, but it was that one particularly, actually, was the audience really appreciated it, and it was quite a nice experience.
And what are you hearing from your audiences?
We've had a lot of great feedback. Yeah, especially from people that maybe have never heard contemporary music. We had one really special encounter last fall where a lady that was in her mid or late 80s was at our concert, had never been to a contemporary music concert of any sort in her whole life, and she told us after the concert it was one of her most favorite experiences ever. So that was pretty special to hear.
It seems to me that you're reinventing the contemporary classical music experience for an audience, which in a way might be a way to save classical music. Could you talk about your experience as an audience going to classical music and what you think needs to be changed for audiences to feel more welcome?
Well, I think, and I mean, I have nothing necessarily against more traditional ensemble. Like, I think everybody has their authentic way they're going to go about doing things. But one thing I do think would be nice to see more of is less of an emphasis on a particular repertoire and more of an emphasis on the experience of the concert, and how is it an experience, and it's not just a collection of pieces that you like, because to me that's not necessarily good curating. We need to have more of an emphasis on an arc or a story. And
Edana, what's your take on that?
Yeah, same. It's when we've gone to concerts before, sometimes we've gone to contemporary music concerts, and that's fine for someone like us who enjoys contemporary music, but it can be alienating when the performer on stage, for example, just says very technical things to the audience, which that's not going to help them understand the piece. They need to hear more of the story again, just about the piece. We were at a concert, quite a famous pianist, actually, I won't name him, last summer, and he was playing the Concord Sonata. And he basically said, it's too complicated for the audience to understand, so I'll just play it. And so anyway.
Wow, such disrespect.
Yeah,
wow.
So that's not what we want to do, and we want to respect the audience and have fun with them, basically.
Because I think what a lot of people who are not accustomed to classical music, one barrier they face is that you're expected to know a lot already. Like, for instance, you're expected to know not to clap between movements of a symphony, which is not intuitive at all because there's an ending and you want to clap. So
exactly,
there's something about rewriting or doing away with the rules and not making people feel ignorant for just stepping through the door.
Exactly.
Did you have any naysayers when you were first starting out?
For me, it was people that they had good intentions for me, but they were concerned about pursuing kind of a niche within a niche. Classical music is already relatively, compared to other genres, maybe a smaller way that you could exist in the world, and then within that is contemporary music, and then even within that is our little subgenre of contemporary classical music. So it's a tricky thing, but I still think everything is possible.
You've brought up genre a few times. What genre would you yourselves classify yourselves? I mean, one of your pieces is a chainsaw. I don't associate that with classical music. So what? But yet you must be pressured to put a label on yourself. If you could make up your own label, what would it be?
That's a really good question, Pierre Carlo. We should think about this more, I think. But we've always we put the label of contemporary classical or classical music on it. Maybe that's the thing where it kind of inhabits in people's imagination most easily. But I think it's at least what we're trying to do is really our own ensemble. Is hopefully its own sort of entity.
What's the most unusual sound you two have created together on stage?
So one composer that we were very close to, Monica Pearce, originally from Prince Edward Island, and now she lives in Michigan. She's written us, we premiered one of her pieces that wasn't written for us, but we kind of took it over and premiered it. And it used this set of custom bell symbols that are cast out of a church bell like alloy, but in the shape of a very thick cymbal. And I have 8 of these, and they're a really unique sound.
Now, did you already have them, or did you borrow them from her? Or what?
I had them cast specifically so that we could play this piece.
And wait, so this is fascinating. So did she provide the designs? Like, did she know what the sound was, and you had to translate into what the instrument should look like?
Okay, yeah. So it's a bit of a story, this piece. So and I love all the different connections and how how it came together, because it really kind of fell into our laps, and we never would have expected to play it. But it sort of has defined at least one part of our sound because of the way things kind of turned out. If you want to hear a bit of the backstory, I'd be
Yeah,
happy to share it.
yeah.
So the cymbals themselves were originally, I guess, conceived of by the drummer from Wilco, Glenn Coche, and he had them cast for a piece that John Luther Adams had written for him, and that's where they initially came from, is just a small part of this larger piece by John Luther Adams. And then my former percussion teacher from when I was in high school, Ben Reimer, he played that piece, Illimac, and had some bells forged for it. And then I guess years ago, Monica Pearce, the composer, had written Ben this piece, which is the one that we premiered, and he just never got around to premiering it because the duo that he played with, they had dissolved and didn't get a chance to premiere it.
When we first got the score for the piece, it was near the beginning of our time as a duo, and it looked so complicated, and the whole idea of having to acquire these bell symbols, that we sort of shelved it for a couple of years. And then I guess about a year into the pandemic, or maybe 8 months or so, we thought this is now the time to attack this project. And that's when that whole sound world started for us.
So you had them actually cast. You did not buy an extant set.
No, exactly. And that was one of the cool things too, is the Sabian cymbal company who made them, they're so expensive to cast that they don't really make a run of prototypes. It'll just be they cast it and you either like it or you don't. And so it was nice because this was the third or the fourth set of bells that they cast. So they've really, in my opinion at least, the sound has really improved, and I just love the sound of them.
That's amazing, because you're revealing something to me that I hadn't thought of, that new music, of course, sometimes creates new instruments.
Mm-hmm.
It's moving technology and artistry forward in different ways. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about systemic change. In what ways could the business of classical music be changed to allow the kind of innovation you both are passionate about?
It's a tricky thing because I think the main hurdle for us, which we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the interview, is the main hurdle is convincing the presenter that the audience is going to like what they hear. And as far as we've experienced, if you give the audience the opportunity to be able to listen, we always like to say, listen curiously. If the presenter gives the audience the opportunity to listen curiously, most of the time I think they will. But sometimes it almost feels to me like the presenters they don't trust their audience to be taken on a journey. So they're often feeding them things that they expect they will like, instead of taking a chance. So I'd like to see more willingness for a bit of risk taking on the part of the presenters.
Edana, what do you think?
Yeah, pretty much the same idea.
I wonder if part of that is because the presenters may have been burned before by audiences' negative reaction to a concert that was not familiar to them. But there's clearly your method of involving them and of storytelling might be different than many other contemporary ensembles.
That could be the case. I just think that that's also part of this. This may be kind of jumping into another question that's down the line, but I feel like that's another thing that could be perhaps talked about more at the kind of the conservatory level. Because if we're thinking that people going through music school and this type of thing, if we're training them to become professional musicians, or that's the assumption, then beyond just having technical prowess at your instrument, I think we also need to be teaching people that it doesn't matter how much technical prowess you have if you're not engaging your audience, and you're just if you're not thinking about your audience, then that's wrong. We need to be considering their experience, because without them, none of this would be possible.
That's interesting. That's probably maybe taught to conductors or people who are going to be in leadership positions, but you're saying every musician should have a sense of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a certain extent, and especially if you're thinking about if the musician in question is considering like their solo or chamber music, oriented career, that becomes really important, because more so than an orchestra musician, you have to interact with your audience on a regular basis and be more responsible for the programming.
How would you teach the importance of that to conservatory students?
Well, something just occurred to me, and I think I would love to be able to do this experiment, but to have like a curation kind of class.
Oh.
I think that could be really, so where I'm not sure how this would work fully fleshed out, because this is just occurring to me now, but to have some kind of thing where the concept of the program was what was, being appraised or being graded, not necessarily the performance of it. Maybe the performance is just theoretical, and it's just a matter of like considering your choices more than just, I like this sonata and I like this sonata and I'm going to play them both. But how deep can we go with, what brings these pieces together, and how is that going to translate to a great experience for the audience? And that's an exercise that Edana and I sort of do involuntarily when we're working on a new concept for a program. We write a list of the music that could work, and then we discuss, why would this work here, or how could this flow better? And these kinds of questions are things that are really important to us.
You can read a longer written version of this interview and see some images of SHHH at uncsa.edu/artrestart. Be sure to subscribe, because we've got some wonderful interviews in the pipeline for you. Our next episode will feature Harlan, Kentucky-based author Robert Gipe, theater maker, novelist, and author of an award-winning trilogy that tracks a fictional family navigating the many challenges and joys of life in contemporary Appalachia. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, thank you for listening.